Hello and welcome. My name is Marina, and I am 67 years old. I want to tell you what happened the afternoon my daughter-in-law dropped my late husband's pocket watch into the kitchen garbage can, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Nobody wants that old junk. Marina, it's taking up space." I said nothing. I just walked over to the trash can, reached past the coffee grounds and the crumpled paper towels, and I lifted that watch out with both hands. She rolled her eyes and walked out of the room. I stood there at the kitchen counter holding that watch the way you hold something breakable, something you are terrified of losing twice. My husband Richard had carried it every single day for 41 years. It was a plain silver pocket watch, nothing fancy to look at scratched on the case, the chain slightly tarnished, the glass face fogged from age. He had inherited it from his own grandfather, a man who came to this country with nothing but a suitcase and a determination that humbled everyone who knew him. When Richard passed, 3 years before that afternoon, the watch was on his nightstand. I had held it the night of his funeral and wound the crown slowly, listening to the soft ticking, and I felt for a moment like he was still in the room with me. I kept it on the dresser in the bedroom, right there next to his photograph. The reason it ended up in my daughter-in-law's kitchen trash can on a Saturday in October requires me to back up a little. My son Kevin had married Christine 7 years earlier, and I had tried to dried. I want to be honest. I truly had tried to build a good relationship with her. She was sharp and ambitious, and she had built a successful event planning business from nothing, and I respected that. But from the very first Thanksgiving, I felt something in how she looked at me. Not cruelty exactly, more like appraisal. Like she was constantly measuring what I was worth and finding the number too small. My granddaughter Lily was 6 years old that October. She was Kevin and Christine's daughter, their only child, and she was the kind of child who makes you believe the world is still fundamentally good. She had her father's dark eyes and this habit of tilting her head sideways when she was thinking hard about something. She called me Grandma Mari. She would climb into my lap without asking, which I loved, and she would reach up and pat my cheek with her small, warm hand like she was checking that I was real. Lily loved that pocket watch. She had discovered it on my dresser the previous Christmas when she was visiting, and she had asked me about it with that serious, tilted head expression, and I had told her about her great-great-grandfather coming to America, and her great-grandfather Richard, and how the watch had traveled through 4 generations of our family. She held it carefully in both hands, the way I had shown her, and she wound it slowly and listened to the ticking. Her eyes went wide. "Grandma Mari," she whispered. "It sounds like a little heart." After that, every time she visited, she would ask to hold the watch. It became our thing, our quiet ritual. I would lift her onto the bed, and we would sit together, and I would wind it, and we would both listen to that small, steady ticking. And I would tell her stories about Richard, about his laugh, about the way he used to burn toast every single morning without exception for 41 years. That October, Kevin and Christine had asked me to stay for a week while they handled some work obligations. It was supposed to be a good week. Lily was thrilled. She had taped a construction paper sign to my guest room door that said Grandma Mari's room with a drawing of the two of us, which I still have. But Christine was in the middle of planning a large corporate gala for a client she very much wanted to impress, and the stress had sharpened every edge in her. By the 3rd day, she was snapping at Kevin over dinner, redirecting Lily away from me with reasons that seemed to multiply and shift. Lily needed to finish homework. Lily needed a bath. Lily needed to practice piano. I understood the stress. I did. I tried to stay out of the way. On Thursday morning, I came downstairs and found Christine reorganizing the living room bookshelf. She had pulled several things off the end table near the couch. A small, framed photo of Kevin as a boy, a little ceramic bird I had given them when they moved in, and my husband's pocket watch. I had brought the watch with me because Lily had asked me to. She wanted to show her friend Sophie. I had set it on the end table the night before, while I sat with Lily before bed. "I'm clearing off these surfaces," Christine said without looking up. "We have clients coming to the house Saturday for a pre-event walkthrough, and the place looks cluttered." "Of course," I said. "I'll take the watch back upstairs." "Actually," she said, and she picked up the watch and turned it over once in her hand like she was looking at a rock she had found in the driveway. "Kevin and I have been talking about clearing out some of the old things around here. This has just been sitting around taking up space." I felt something go cold in me. "That's Richard's watch," I said quietly. "I brought it this week for Lily." "Lily is 7, Christine said. "She doesn't need to be attached to old things. Kevin agrees it's better not to fill her head with sentiment." She walked to the kitchen and I followed her, and I watched her drop the watch into the kitchen trash can, as though it weighed nothing. As though it was nothing. "Nobody wants that old junk, Marina. It's taking up space." Then she walked out. I stood there for a long moment. I thought about saying a dozen things. I thought about calling Kevin, who was upstairs in his home office. I thought about sitting down at the kitchen table and crying, which is what I actually wanted to do. Instead, I reached into the trash can and I took the watch back. I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of the guest bed, and I held the watch in my lap, and I looked at it for a very long time. The scratched silver case, the tarnished chain, the fogged glass face. There had always been something about this watch that Richard had mentioned to me once, years ago. Something about the case having a second compartment, a hidden space under the inner plate. He had mentioned it so casually, one evening, that I had half forgotten it. He had said his grandfather had put something inside for safekeeping when he first came to this country, that it was a family custom, and he had smiled in that private way he had, and said perhaps he had continued the custom. I had meant to ask him about it later, and somehow later never came, and then he was sick, and then he was gone. I had never opened the inner plate. The truth is, I did not know how to open it. I had tried once, gently, after Richard died, but I could not find the mechanism, and I was afraid of forcing it. I thought about this for a long time, sitting on that guest bed. Then I put the watch in my purse, told Christine I was going out for some air, and I drove to the small jewelry and watch repair shop on the main street of their town, a place I had passed twice during my visit, and noted with the vague recognition you give to familiar-looking things. The shop was narrow and smelled of machine oil and metal polish. The man behind the counter was perhaps 70, with thick glasses and a white jeweler's coat, and the kind of stillness that comes from spending decades doing careful, exacting work. His name, I learned later, was Mr. Hendricks. He had owned the shop for 38 years. I set the watch on the glass counter. I explained that it had belonged to my late husband, that I believed there might be a hidden compartment in the inner plate, and that I was hoping he could look at it without damaging anything. He picked it up without a word. He brought it close to his glasses. He turned it over slowly. He set it under a small lamp and looked at the edge of the case with a loupe. Then he took a very thin tool from the tray beside him and pressed it to a point on the inner rim that I would never have found on my own, and the inner plate swung open on a tiny hidden hinge. He looked down into the compartment. He did not speak for what felt like a long time. Then he set the watch down on the counter and took off his glasses and looked at me. "Ma'am," he said, "I think you need to sit down." He brought me a chair from the back room. He set the watch on the counter in front of me, open, and I looked inside. There was a folded piece of paper, thin as onion skin, protected inside a small wax paper envelope. Mr. Hendricks carefully lifted the envelope with 2 fingers and set it on the counter. The paper inside was old but intact. He unfolded it delicately, a millimeter at a time. It was a property deed. I did not understand at first what I was looking at. Mr. Hendricks, who had clearly seen enough of the world to have a steady hand in unusual situations, walked me through it slowly. He pointed to the date, 1962. He pointed to a name, which was Richard's grandfather. He pointed to a parcel description, which I could not parse, and an address, which I recognized. The address was the piece of land on which Richard's family home had been built. Let me explain why this mattered so much. Richard's family home, the house where he had grown up, the house his grandfather had built in Vermont, had been sold after his parents passed. Sold by Richard's older brother Daniel, without Richard's full knowledge of what the actual property boundaries included. There had been a dispute. Years ago, quiet and unresolved. Richard had believed that a portion of land adjacent to the home, nearly 4 acres along a creek, had been part of the original parcel, but had somehow been excluded from the sale. He had looked for the original deed and could not find it. Daniel had insisted Richard was misremembering. Eventually, Richard had let it go the way he let many things go, with a quiet grief he never quite put into words. That land along the creek had since been developed. It was now the parking lot and rear terrace of a resort hotel that had opened in 2019. I had driven past it once on my way to see a friend and thought of Richard without knowing exactly why. Mr. Hendricks helped me take photographs of the deed with my phone. He refolded it, replaced it in the wax paper envelope, and gently closed the inner plate. He handed the watch back to me. "You'll want a property attorney," he said. "A good one." I sat in my car in the parking lot for a while before I drove back to Kevin's house. I was not thinking about Christine and her Saturday walkthrough and her cluttered surfaces. I was thinking about Richard's grandfather, who had come to this country with nothing and had been careful enough to put a deed inside a watch and pass it down through 4 generations against exactly the kind of moment when it would matter. I was thinking about Richard, who had wound this watch every morning and carried it in his breast pocket every day, and who had pressed it into my hands at the end and said, "Keep this safe, Mari," which I had interpreted as sentiment and which I now understood was something more. I called my friend Deborah, who had been a paralegal for 20 years before she retired. She told me to call an attorney named Patricia Walsh in Burlington, who specialized in property and estate disputes, and who Deborah described as a quiet woman who does not lose. I called Patricia Walsh from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I had. She told me to photograph everything and send it to her and to touch nothing else. And there was something in her voice, a sharpening, a coming to attention that told me she understood already what this might be. I drove back to Kevin's house and I made no mention to Christine of where I had been. That evening at dinner, she talked about her gala client and Kevin talked about a work trip coming up. And Lily sat beside me and put her head briefly against my shoulder, and I put my arm around her and held on. The next morning, I drove home to my own house in Connecticut. Christine did not seem sorry to see me go. Kevin hugged me at the door and looked a little guilty in the vague way he had started to look around me. And I wanted to say something to him about his father, about the watch, about what happens when you let other people decide what matters, but I did not. Not yet. I worked with Patricia Walsh for the next 6 weeks. She was thorough and relentless, and she communicated in short, precise sentences that told me exactly what was happening without drama or padding. The deed was authenticated. The original parcel boundaries were verified against county survey records that had been on file since 1962 and had never been properly consulted during Daniel's sale. Patricia Walsh filed a formal claim. Daniel's initial response, delivered through his own attorney, was dismissal. The deed was old, the sale was decades past, there was no actionable claim. His attorney used the word frivolous twice in one letter. Patricia Walsh sent a response that was 4 pages long and contained the phrase actionable adverse claim 7 times. I did not know exactly what that meant, but I knew from her tone that it was not friendly. Kevin called me 3 weeks into this process. Christine had apparently told him what had happened, that I had retrieved the watch from the trash, that I had taken it to a shop, that something had come of it. I do not know how she found out. Perhaps she noticed the watch was gone. Perhaps she had been paying more attention to my comings and goings than I realized. Kevin's first question was not, "How are you, Mom?" And it was not, "I'm sorry." Christine threw away Dad's watch. His first question was about the land. He wanted to know what it was worth. I told him I did not know yet. This was true. He said he thought they should probably talk to Patricia Walsh together as a family. He said Christine had some thoughts about how to handle this. He said the word handle in a way that made something in me go still and watchful. I said I would let him know when there was more information. Then I ended the call. Patricia Walsh told me 2 weeks later that the resort hotel had been built on land to which Richard's family had a legitimate prior claim, and that the current owners had, after reviewing the authenticated deed and the survey records, entered into what she called a posture of serious negotiation. She also told me, in one of those short, precise sentences, that the land in question, given the development and current property values, had an assessed value of just under $2 million, and that the claim for damages and unjust enrichment over the years of use could reasonably exceed that amount. I sat down in my kitchen and looked out the window at the backyard where Richard had built a raised garden bed the summer before he got sick, which I still planted every spring, and I breathed very carefully for several minutes. Then I called my daughter-in-law. I want to be honest about this call. I did not call Christine to gloat. I am 67 years old and I have been through enough to know that gloating is for people who still have something to prove. I called because Lily was in that house and Kevin was in that house, and whatever happened next was going to affect all of us, and I believed that deserved a direct conversation. Christine answered with the particular tone she used when she was performing patience. She asked how I was. I told her I was well. I told her there had been a development with the pocket watch and that Patricia Walsh would be reaching out to Kevin directly as a family member, and that I wanted her to hear it from me first. There was a long silence. Then Christine said, very quietly, "How much?" I told her what Patricia Walsh had told me about the assessed value. I did not tell her about the damages figure. I waited. "Kevin will want to be involved in the decisions," she said. Her voice had changed. The performance of patience was gone. "Kevin is Richard's son," I said. "Of course he will be kept informed." "Marina," she paused. "I'm sorry about the watch. That was out of line. I thought about Richard carrying that watch every day for 41 years. I thought about Lily whispering that it sounded like a little heart. I thought about his grandfather crossing an ocean and folding a piece of paper very carefully and putting it inside a hidden compartment against the day when someone would need it." "Yes," I said. It was. The negotiations concluded 4 months after Patricia Walsh filed the initial claim. The resort ownership group, faced with the authenticated deed and survey records and the prospect of extended litigation, agreed to a settlement. I am not at liberty to share the exact figure, but Patricia Walsh considered it fair. I considered it the fulfillment of something Richard had carried his whole life without resolution. Kevin came to my house the weekend after the settlement closed. He came alone, which told me something. He sat at the kitchen table, and he looked like a man who had been doing a great deal of thinking, which was good. We talked for 3 hours, not about the money, about his father, about the watch, about Lily, about what I had tried to explain to Christine on the phone, which was not actually about money at all. It was about what you keep and what you discard and the difference between the two, which is not always something you can see from the outside. Kevin cried at my kitchen table, which he had not done since Richard's funeral. I handed him tissues, and I did not say anything comforting, and I did not say anything unkind. I just sat with him the way you sit with someone who is finding their way back to something important. Lily came with him the following Sunday. She ran through my front door and threw her arms around my waist, and I held on to the top of her head. Later that afternoon, we sat on the edge of my bed together, and I lifted the pocket watch from the dresser and I placed it in her hands. She held it the way I had shown her carefully, with both palms, and I wound the crown slowly, and we listened to that soft, small ticking. She looked up at me with those dark, serious eyes, and she said, "Grandma Mari, you kept it safe." "Yes," I said. She tilted her head, thinking, "Did great-grandpa Richard know?" I think, I said, that he knew it mattered. She looked back down at the watch, listening. The afternoon light came through the window and sat in her hair, and I thought about her great-great-grandfather stepping off a boat with a suitcase and a watch and a piece of paper folded inside a hidden compartment, trusting 4 generations forward. I thought about what it means to carry something carefully through time and hand it to the right person. That evening, after Lily was asleep on the couch with a blanket pulled up to her chin, I sat in the kitchen and I wound the pocket watch one more time, and I held it in my lap and I listened. Tick, 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 like a little heart, still going. And I thought, this is what we owe the people who came before us. Not to throw away what they carried, not to mistake patience for weakness or silence for nothing, not to decide that something has no value simply because we cannot immediately see what it holds. Richard never raised his voice in 41 years of marriage. He never demanded to be seen. He trusted that the truth had a way of coming forward eventually, and he was right. So do I. That is my story. If it reminded you of something you are holding on to, some quiet conviction, some old worn thing that other people have underestimated, I hope it reminded you to hold on. The right moment always comes. And if someone in your life has told you that something you love is just taking up space, please consider. They may simply not yet know what's inside. Thank you for spending this time with me today.